Hello, thank you for joining me. My name is Elizabeth Bostic, and today we're going to be painting this beautiful Eastern redbud tree. It is done in a very loose and fun manner, so I hope that you are able to relax and have fun with this. Let's get started. Today I am using my 5" by 7.5" watercolor sketchbook and a number 6 round paintbrush. The first step for this painting is to paint a cloud shape with just water, and you want to make sure that the water is nice and shiny on the paper. That tells you have enough water down on your paper. The next step is to put little dots of the magenta color. For this, I'm using the magenta rose, but you can use whatever magenta you have. And I'm polka dotting the cloud so that the cloud is pretty full of these magenta polka dots. I'm just lightly tapping them in, and then the water is making like little starburst shapes out of it. Then I go into a violet. For this one, I'm using the quinacridone violet, as I'm using the Rosa Gallery Botanical 28 colors, but it can be any purple or violet that you have. And I'm making tree branch shapes or kind of squiggly lines that come from the center of the cloud out towards the sides of the cloud. They can be pretty random. You can get loose with this. It doesn't follow any rhyme or reason, just so that you have branches coming out from your entire cloud. On the inside of the wet part of the cloud, the branches will be wider as it's still wet and the water is pulling the paint so that it's like little soft edges and almost cloud formations instead of branches. And then when your branches leave the wet part of the paper, you can see how it's creating hard lines, and you can see the thin line of the brush that the brush is making. Once I've gone in with the purple lines, I'm going back in with the magenta and going over some of those purple lines and making some new magenta lines so that I have both the magenta and the purple in the tree. And then you can see where I went in and added a little bit more water. I added a few more polka dots there. And then I am polka dotting down the length of the branches. As with redbuds, they have those adorable little magenta violet buds that form along the branches. And this is what I'm trying to recreate here without being too particular about it, just to make sure each branch has some of these little buds. I'm taking that still wet brush with the paint on it that has become a lighter shade of the magenta as I'm using it. As you use the paint on your brush, it gets lighter and lighter as you go. And I'm just adding in some more brushes, and then I'm kind of splotching it around. Then I add some more of that magenta paint straight from the palette, and I'm dabbing that into the branches, dabbing it into the still wet cloud area, just to fill in the space to make it look like it's a redbud tree that's in full bloom. And I keep going into the magenta that's in the pan and putting in more and more little polka dots, little tiny flowers. Redbud's one of those trees that when it's in bloom, you can still see the individual branches pretty well. But if it's an old enough redbud tree, it does look a bit like a cloud of magenta or a cloud of violet. There are even white redbud trees, which I think would also be a lot of fun to paint. For the trunk and the branches of the tree, I am putting some of the black paint with just a couple little brushfuls of water to make sure it is a darker gray, but still dark enough where I don't have to do too many layers. And I'm starting from the bottom of the page, not off of the page. You want to make sure that you still have a little bit of the white paper. You don't want to go all the way off the bottom of the page, just so it doesn't look like it's cut funny. You want it to look like it's grounded in the paper. and then I'm bringing the trunk and the branches up into that still wet cloud of pink and purple. And in the areas where it's extra wet, you can see how the paint is spreading out into that water. And the areas where it's just a little bit more dry, it's a little bit more of a harder line. And I'm taking those brush strokes out of the cloud so that the tips of them are onto the paper. And some of the brush strokes I'm not taking all the way out of the cloud. They remain inside of the cloud and they end in the cloud. But some of them I am also taking out of the cloud of the purple and the magenta so that you can see the smaller brush stroke that gives you the look of that tree branch. The further you go out from the center of the tree or from a larger branch, the thinner you want that branch to be so that it gives you the look of the tree. The branches tend to get smaller and smaller the farther away you get from the larger branches. Now the tree has dried, and I make a wash of the magenta rose as well as the quinacridone violet. And what I'm doing is I'm adding in a little bit more of those little tiny dots to represent the little tiny flowers. Just here and there, if you see a branch that looks kind of bare, that looks like it needs a few blooms, go ahead and add them here and there. And then I'm also going over some of the branches, kind of rubbing my brush back and forth a bit to make a bit of a wider, kind of an up and down line, to make it look like the branch is just a little bit more in bloom. And then I'm dabbing that wash here and there, just kind of where you feel it might look a little bit empty. Maybe it needs a little bit more of the magenta, a little more flower. I then add some more of the black paint to the black wash that I've created. This way it will be a shade darker and I'm able to add a bit of detail, making it look like the sun might be shining down and there's a bit of a shadow to the left-hand side on the trunk where you're putting just a bit of a darker line on one side of the trunk of the tree and then onto those larger branches, the two main ones going up. Then I'm also going in and adding a few little tiny lines, just a little bit of detail to look like some of those branches have a bit of shadow to them, to give them a bit of definition inside the Redbud cloud of blossoms. I would be careful at this point to just use the very tip of your brush so that you don't have super thick, dark branches going into that flowery part of the tree. So you're just adding in really thin, fine branches. That way it still shows all of that fun, free-flowing, cloud-like pinks and purples and the black underneath. These little lines are just adding in a bit of interest, a bit of detail, but not covering up all of the work that we've already done. I then wash all the black off of my brush, and we're going back into the magenta rose wash, adding in just a little bit more of that magenta rose, making it just a little bit darker, and then adding in a little bit of that violet so that it is a violet and magenta combination. And we're going to go back into our tree and add just kind of a fun touch where you take a heavier, like a pencil or a brush, and you tap it, and that way the tapping creates a really fun splatter effect that you can't control. And I think that's half the fun, is that you don't know what it's going to produce. You can either tap something hard onto your brush or tap your brush onto something hard. Either way works. I would suggest practicing on a paper towel or a scrap piece of paper before going right onto your paper. Also, you can cover up areas you do not want splattered with scrap paper or paper towels. As you tap, you'll have to go back into the paint, refill it, and this time I put just the purple or violet, and keep tapping as you will dry out your paintbrush as you go. So you just keep going back into your wash and re-wetting your paintbrush. For the very last step, I go back into the magenta and purple wash mix and add in here and there wherever I think it could use just a few more blooms or a little bit of a branch, little teeny tiny dots to represent the little flowers. On some of the old redbud trees in our neighborhood, they have the flowers growing down towards the base of the trees, right on the bark, which I think is just the coolest thing to look at. So I'm adding a few more down towards the base of the tree as well. It's looking finished to me now. I think it's pretty balanced, and I don't want to make it too detailed where we lose that freedom, that free, loose feeling that this painting has. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you get the chance to make a redbud painting of your own. In the next tutorial, I'm going to be showing a pink cherry tree painting done in a similar way, and I'm really excited to get that to you as well. I hope that you enjoy your weekend or your weekday whenever you're watching this. Take care, and I'll see you next time.